Democrats are continuing to celebrate the 2 additional Senate seats won in Georgia this week with the help of Black grassroots organizations. Black voters in Georgia turned out in record numbers to vote for Reverend Raphael, Warnock, and John Ossoff, giving Democrats a majority in the Senate. And while President-elect Joe Biden made sure to thank Black voters in his acceptance speech, many are waiting to see if Democrats will fulfill their many campaign promises. Let's bring in LaTosha Brown. She's the co-founder of Black Voters Matter Fund. Welcome, LaTosha. Great to have you with us. So has the way we talk about Black voters in the Democratic Party shifted at all following the election of Warnock, Ossoff, and President-elect Biden?
If it hasn't, it absolutely should. I do think that there has been a shift. I think there's been a shift in really recognizing kind of the power, the impact, and the influence of Black voters. If we go back to even the nomination, it was the Black voters in South Carolina that actually delivered the nomination, the Democratic nomination, and really gave some wind back into President-elect Biden's campaign. If we go to even the Vice President-elect Kamala Harris, there were Black women who actually organized and were very, very adamant about there needed to be a Black woman on the ticket and actually kept that movement and momentum around that. Then when you look at Black voters in particular were actually significant in the states that made the difference. When you look at Michigan, when you look at Pennsylvania, when you look at ultimately my home state of Georgia, that those states were Black voters were critical in being able to deliver this win to President-elect Joe Biden. In addition to that, now we have not only were we able to actually help put and push Joe Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris into the White House, but we also gave them the reins to be able to govern with. And so there were Black voters that actually propelled the win for 2 senators to come from the state of Georgia that would actually give them the advantage so that they can govern. And so I think that it is without question that Black voters are a key constituency group in the Democratic Party. They're actually the base vote, and it's because of the work, the influence, and the overperformance of Black voters that now I think President-elect Biden has the best possible opportunity to really be able to govern in the way that to be able to meet some of the promises that he's made.
Right, and so now comes the moment of truth for Black voters who are looking for these Democrats to deliver on their promises. 2 Georgia Senate seats now, giving Democrats the majority. We've got a Democrat in the White House. So what does a pro-Black agenda look like, not only for the state of Georgia, but for the country?
I think a pro-Black agenda is actually a pro-people agenda. That ultimately what we need is there are a couple of things. The first thing is I think immediately, based on what we saw in Georgia, based on the voter suppression that I saw, Black voters turned out in record numbers, but that was in spite of voter suppression. It wasn't as if voter suppression did not in fact exist. We're engaged in a lawsuit right now that we're suing the state Secretary of State Raphael for wrongly dropping 198,000 voters just 6 months from the voting rolls, 6 months prior to the primary election. And so I think it's really important for the Congress to take seriously and the Senate under this administration in the first 100 days to really be able to restore voting rights in this country, that the John Lewis Voter Restoration Act is passed immediately, but we need actually some stronger elements as well. The second thing is we all witnessed on Wednesday of this week, we saw an unruly mob take over the state capitol. I myself, I recall my own experience. I'm standing on the Capitol grounds, checking my text messages, and I was actually a police officer walked up to me, a security officer, and said, "Ma'am, what are you doing? You got to move along." And so I am just baffled. Like I am so frustrated and quite frankly angry to actually witness what we witnessed on this Wednesday. Which actually I think it tells us a couple of things. I think it tells us that there's a certain level of complicity that I think that law enforcement has had in this country, that it seems like this aggressive nature only has been directed at the African-American community. And so when we see that when people are actually talking about defund the police or the movement that we want criminal justice and police reform, I think it's right in our face. We've all witnessed that. A very, very different response to a group of protesters who, for the most part, were peaceful protesters, to an unruly mob that actually took over the Capitol in a failed attempted coup. And so I think that the second thing is that we've really got to deal with this police brutality and criminal justice reform. The third thing is I think we have to really be able to deal with the inequities around economic inequities in this country. That fundamentally, when you look at, the wealth of the average white family has 3 times the wealth of a black family. When you look at that, 68% of black women are wage workers, and the wage has not grown to meet the cost of living, right? And so there is a critical issue that I think we have to deal with inequities, that what we have done, Black America showed up for the Democratic Party. We showed up, quite frankly, for this nation. We showed up for democracy. We showed up for ourselves. The question is, will this administration show up for us?
So, LaTosha, we saw the Black women of Georgia receive praise following the election, including from yourself and Stacey Abrams. How do you think that voters in other states can support their local Black organizers and leaders? And also, I want you to touch on the fact that you warned voters it should not be the sole job of Black women or Black voters to carry the burden of victory in Georgia. Can you explain a little more what you mean by this?
No, I think part of it is actually fighting for democracy. I think there's a couple of things. That one, there are some issues. It's not about the partisan issue, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat. It is simply wrong. What we saw happen when we saw the protests earlier this year, where just so that Donald Trump could walk across the street with a Bible and take a photo op at a church, there were protesters that literally that rubber bullets were thrown at them, that tear gas was thrown at them, and then we saw a different response to an angry mob of seditionists in this country. That in itself, it is all in our face right now, and all of us can do something about this around how we have allowed the police to actually be another vehicle to actually oppress, to focus on and be abusive, right, to the African-American community. All of us, everybody has a piece of that. The second thing is, Dr. King used to say, the threat to democracy for one is a threat to democracy for all. I think it's quite poetic that African-Americans in this state, we all witnessed in 2018, we were ground zero for voter suppression. So much so that Stacey Abrams lost her bid to become governor because I think, and many of us, that it was stolen from her because of voter suppression tactics, right? And so here it is that those very Black people were the ones that 2 years later that really were able to be on the forefront of protecting democracy, and they showed up. And so if we can't understand at this point that whenever anybody's free and fair access to the ballot is impacted, that it impacts and it weakens democracy for all of us. And I think the third and the last thing is I think we have to really get back to an agenda that is really centered in human rights, that we have to go beyond this issue of partisan politics, that there's some things that are just right and wrong. All lives matter, right? And so Black lives, being able to say that, we're in a country that you can't even say Black lives matter, and folks are getting upset because I am saying that my life matters. And we're actually witnessing where there are those that don't think that our lives matter. On the same day that Black voters in the state of Georgia delivered this historic win, on that same day, we saw the officials in Kenosha say that the police officers in the shooting of Brother Jacob, that they would not be held accountable because they were fearful in his life, although we actually saw him aggressively pursue him, hold him by the shirt, and shoot him 7 times to where he's paralyzed. And so my point is, we have to be honest and face what America's evil has been. It's really around racism, coddling white supremacy, actually turning our heads when we see the pain of others. And so I'm hoping that this is a new dawn of politics, that we actually, if we're talking about healing the soul of America, the first thing we have to do is stop the pain.
LaTosha Brown, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.